Hello everyone, and welcome to my second tutorial in my Intro to Programming series. In this video we're going to talk about data types, and in particular we're going to go over a definition of some of the common data types, the syntax for using those data types, the size of each of those, and for this video we're going to stick with C#. Other programming languages might have some small differences, but most of the high-level languages are very similar to each other in the data types that they use. Okay, C# data types. Rather than having you sit through the painful experience of watching me type on the screen while I'm trying to record, I went ahead and made a little demo program that shows creating and assigning values to each of the basic data types that are used in C#. So what you see here is a set of program, or I'm sorry, what you see here is a program, and it doesn't really do anything except assign values to data types. And walking through this, the first data type we'll talk about is the S byte, or signed byte, and this is the declaration of the data type. This is a name I'm giving it, and you can give it any name you like. Typically variables start with a small letter, and if you use multiple words you'll use what's called camel type. And so each word begins with a capital letter. You see that? And the ST that I'm putting in front of these just stands for SpazTech, in case you're wondering. Okay, so in here I have a signed byte that's called ST SByte demo, and I'm making it equal to -128. And over here, I tell you a little bit about each of these data types. So an S byte is an 8-bit integer, and an integer is any whole number. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, -1, -2, -3. And because it's 8 bits, we can go from -128 to a positive 127. If you try to go lower than -128 or higher than 127, most of the IDEs you're working in will give you an error. I wrote this in Visual Studio, and as soon as I tried to put in a -129, it gave me an error. It told me I can't do that, and hopefully whatever you're using does the same. So the next is the byte, and again this is the type, and then the name, and then the value. And it's also an 8-bit integer, only it's unsigned, meaning it can only be a positive value, and in the case of programming, 0 is a positive number, and a byte can be anything from 0 to 255. If you try to put 256 in there, the program will give you an error. It will not work. Next is the int, or this is what's most common form of the integer. Again, a name and a value. And an int is a 32-bit integer. It's signed. That means it can be negative or positive. And I'm not going to read this all out, but here you can see this is the range of numbers it can be. So it's quite a bit larger than the byte. Next we have the unsigned int, or uint, and again it's very similar to the byte. It can be a value from a positive value from 0 to this number here. It's 32 bits in size. Moving along, we have a long, which is a signed value. So it can be from that number to that number. So it's a 64-bit integer. And then we have an unsigned long, and it's also a 64-bit integer, and it can be from 0 to whatever that is. I'm not going to read it out. So very large numbers there. Moving on, then we have the next three are very similar. The only thing that's different from them is the size. So we have the float, the double, and a decimal. A float is 32 bits. A double is 64 bits. A decimal is 128 bits. In all other regards, they are the same. And they can be negative or positive, and the thing that makes them different from all the previous data types is they're a floating point value, which means they're a fraction. There's a decimal place in them. They can be something other than a whole number. And the syntax in C#, sometimes, depending on the system you're using, you don't need to do this, but it's good form to put an F after any float value, a D after a double value, and an M after a decimal value. Okay, so next we have the bool, or the Boolean value, and it's true or false. So that's all it can be, is true or false. And then the char, or it's a character value. It can hold a single character. In this case, we're going to hold the character T, small t. So that's about it. Now, as you look at these, you might ask yourself, if we can hold this very large value here, why in the world would we need these little ones down here? And the answer to that is performance. Imagine that you're sending a piece of data down a form of communication somewhere, or even in a game. You're updating a value. If, let's say, you're doing it 10 times per second, well, it's going to take a lot more CPU and a lot more memory to send an unsigned long than it is to send a byte. So when performance is critical, or performance is important, you want to use the smallest sized type that is appropriate for the value you're holding. So if you're working with a number that's never going to be larger than 10, for example, you'll want to use a byte or a signed byte. And it goes on and on. So if in most cases you can get away with, most cases you might not need larger than an int, but on the other hand, you may need something a little larger. All right, and so when it comes to the floating point values, really the difference here is in precision. And again, it's a balance between performance and precision. You can, because of the nature of a digital system, you can only get so close to an actual analog value. And the decimal is going to be much more precise than a float. And if the precision of that value is critical, you need to consider using a double or a decimal. If it's not so critical and you're really going for performance, then the float is what you should consider using. So those are the basic data types, and there's a lot more out there on a different programming languages. Sometimes there's some languages will create data types from these, but these are really the foundation. All right, so that's it for the data type video. In the next one, I'm going to start to talk about using operators on those data types, and that's basically addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, incrementing, and decrementing. So we'll talk about that next time. Visit my website, and thanks a lot. Bye.